The budget workshop number 2. I'm going to call this meeting to order. It is now 4:33. We are at the Oasis High School cafeteria. Meeting is called to order.
Ready to go? All right. Can everybody hear me okay? Yes. All right, great. All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nicole Reitler. I am the budget administrator for the City of Cape Coral. Thank you for joining us today for the second charter school budget workshop. After our last meeting, our staff went back and worked with the team at the charter school, and we've made some additional adjustments to the budget. And what we're going to do today is we're going to walk you through those changes, the enrollment projections, our overall budget, as well as any changes to our revenue and expenditures with an opportunity for discussion. All right, so into our budget process. Each year we begin our budget process in September with your annual strategic plan session. As each phase is worked through, that brings us to May, where we are currently with the presentation of your second budget workshop. Moving forward, we're going to look for the approval of your tentative 2025 budget in June, with your final approval in August, at which time it will be incorporated into the city's budget for the adoption at the public September hearing. With our enrollment forecast, the only big change you will see this session is from the first budget workshop is we have included an additional 93 students at the high school. That brings our total enrollment from 3,333 students to 3,426 students. This is based on the forecasted numbers that the high school believes will come in with the increase for next year. This gives us the ability to show you the impact of those revenues on the overall budget for decision-making processes. Okay. For your overall budget overview, your fiscal year 2025 expenditures total $33.476 million. With your increase in FEFP revenue due to that additional 93 students, as well as the LCI funding, it leaves us with a net revenue and expenditures of $1,695,432, which is comprised of $906,500, which is a result of your LCI funding, and $788,932 as a result of the additional high school students. These funds are left as unallocated resources going forward into the next fiscal year. Currently, we have put those funds marked as reserves so that we could have a structurally balanced charter school budget, but as we stated, they are currently unallocated and up for discussion. That brings us into our budget overview by school. When we look at a breakdown by school, the South, North, and Middle School campuses each have a balance going to reserves. The high school, while there's a negative balance, it is offset by the additional revenue that will come in when we see those 93 students. This provides us a balanced budget overall for each school moving into the next year. Focusing on your revenues, charter school revenues are budgeted at 99% per financial policy. This was a change that resulted last year when we updated your financial policies with the fiscal year 2024 budget. We adjust each revenue based on all information available at the current time from the state as well as all other funding sources. Since our last budget meeting, we have not adjusted any of the revenue sources other than the FEFP based on that increase in the additional 93 students. That brings us into your LCI revenue and analysis, and I'm going to bring Mr. Mark Mason up to have a conversation.
Hey, good afternoon. Mark Mason, Financial Services Director. I was asked to put this back into the presentation, primarily to kind of give you an idea of a comparison, as you would, if you would, between the annual debt service that we currently have and the annual debt service or the lease payment that is currently built into the lease agreement that the city has with the charter school. And so on top you would see what I originally presented to kind of give you an idea if the charter school authority were to revert back to the original lease where you pick up the cost of the annual debt service, that clearly from the LCI funding as well as the PICO funding, assuming the PICO funding doesn't go away, it would cover that cost beginning in 2028. The prior to that, actually in 2027. Prior to that, we would continue to pick up a certain cost, primarily due to the state's implementation of this plan on a 20, 40, 60, 80, 100% program over a 5-year period, in order to basically to give the school districts the opportunity to implement this over time. Below it is the current state, and it would give you an idea of the net available after capital outlay that would be available in over the same 5-year period that we're talking about, 25 through 29. The charter school would have about $12.1 million that would be available for some capital outlay that is outside of the ones that you see up there, for the annual bus purchases, P&C insurance, annual IT-related costs, as well as the current cost of the net of the lease at $1.5 million. And so, you know, from a comparative standpoint, you know, the resources are available either way, but our recommendation is, and continues to be to the City Council, that we revert the charter school lease back to its original format and recover the full cost of the annual debt service. And as we move forward, any additional resources that are available would go towards any capital improvements or otherwise for the charter schools. Now, as we were talking about this last week, there was a lot of questions associated with, you know, what is it that we're offsetting, you know, with regard to, you know, the LCI and the PICO funding. Right now, as you'll recall, I explained that the LCI funding is the primary, the PICO funding is the secondary. The calculation today is LCI less PICO gives you the LCI funding that's going to come in from the school district. As the state, which right now they don't seem to be going down that road yet, but if they eliminate PICO funding over time, then the LCI funding would take precedent, and it would be the final amount that would come into the city for the charter school system. And so, as you see, in 2025, we utilize the full amount of the PICO funding that's available to you, both PICO and the LCI, but it still provides for remaining funds that have not been allocated. In this case, a little over $900,000, which, again, we would recommend that we would allocate towards the capital improvements necessary for the system, both, you know, for the building maintenance, et cetera. So 2026, again, you pick up the full cost of the IT equipment, you pick up the full cost of the buses, you pick up the full cost of, you know, the building lease as it currently exists, and you have, again, remaining funds that are available as in 2027. So, and Nicole's getting ready to come back up here and finalize out the budget for you. Thank you.
We have some questions for Ms. Do you mind answering a couple questions for me?
I don't mind answering any questions.
Perfect, thank you, sir. Do we have some questions that we'd like to ask? As far as the PICO funding goes, even if the PICO funding goes away as it stands, we're not going to be receiving the PICO funding anyways, because it's going to, whatever we're going to receive in LCI funds, they're going to take the PICO funds off of that, off the top, right?
Correct. PICO funds are subtracted from the LCI funds to calculate the LCI funding from the school districts. That is the calculation that's in statute, yes.
So if PICO funding goes away, it's not going to really affect.
It will have no effect on the total dollar value itself.
And then with your recommendation to the city, was your recommendation to go to the full lease of the 3.2 right away, or was that a phased approach?
I could do it right away, but we could also phase it in.
Because I know we're not exactly sure where everything falls monetarily. I think there's some loose ends out there. We don't know where they're going to land, right? So, and I think we don't receive the full LCI balances for a couple of years. That's why
You don't.
I asked that. So,
But I mean, we would write it to reflect that the available funding that comes in will cover the cost of the lease.
Anybody else have any questions for Ms. May? Mr. Now, please.
Thank you, Mark. So when we moved into the new lease, right, a requirement of the city was to close down our departments, finance, for HR, for IT, for facilities, for maintenance, because the city felt that if the city's going to kick in another 1.6 on our behalf, the management should move over to the city. And at that point, the rationale was, if you were going to require you to do this for us to take on some of the burden of this. So has there been any thought of, if we go back to the 3.2, that we'll move those departments back over to us, where we can manage them and we can have more control over them?
I have not given that any thought at all, no.
So
Well, you asked me if we've given it any thought, and the answer is no, we haven't.
So what would the next step be of giving it thought?
I guess we'll talk internally to find out whether that's the direction we want to go in. And because right now, I would say to you that, you know, unless somebody else has some information to the contrary, I don't understand why you wouldn't want to continue with the services of the city. So unless there's something to the contrary that I'm not aware of.
Absolutely. Well, I think it was,
you know,
rather a rather challenging shift initially for us. We went through a 1-year transition to get there, with the understanding that we had a longer term lease and the city would be taking on half of the lease cost.
Okay.
Now, in your recommendation, we're shifting back to the 3.2 when we had already done away with a number of key departments. So yes, I think that's something that the board would need to review. Do we want those departments back if we're at 3.2 to have more control? And if so, we'll advise. Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Knight. Some questions? Ms. Benkos? Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Jumping into your staffing changes. From the first workshop, we worked with the charter school team, and we have made some additional staffing changes. Overall, staffing has been adjusted and has decreased by 12.75 FTEs. One thing to note is that with the additional 93 students at the high school, we are not adding any additional teachers at the high school. We've worked in an additional $20,000 into the budget that's going to be allocated to the teachers to teach the additional classes to accommodate those additional 93 students. But overall, the team has evaluated the positions and made the adjustments necessary to make sure that each school is staffed appropriately. Okay, personnel. Your personnel calculations have remained fairly consistent. They're comprised of your base payroll, which includes a 1% increase for all staff in fiscal year 25. Your health plan costs were increased 10%. The FRS increased from 13.57 to 13.63%. And an additional $60,000 was included for longevity bonuses in the future. Taking a look at your operating. For some of the larger purchases, it includes your textbooks at $228,000, the accounting and auditing services at $638,000, food and beverage purchases of $750,000, and training and seminars at around $40,000. Capital outlay. With the LCI funds, we have expanded our capital outlay purchases to include a shark van for $130,000, the purchase of 2 buses at $300,000, the Centigix equipment for $16,376. This is a crisis alert system for school safety, as well as Synology for $6,000. This is a black box drive, basically, that protects the school's data.
Nicole, I have a question.
Sure.
Not about capital outlay necessarily, but the operating expenses.
Yep.
So we're in the process of negotiating we're in the process of getting the intercom system approved. That's $500,000
Yep.
plus. We also have the camera project for this summer, and there's another project that's going on, the server
Mhm.
project. Are those part part of the operating budget for 2025, or are they part of operating for 24 that will roll into 25?
So,
And so how will that be reflected?
so with your, was it your overhead system that you're looking at doing for the 500,000? That is part of your operating for fiscal year 2024. You had enough funds available, so we are purchasing with that. The other two purchases, I believe that you're bringing today, will be used with fiscal year 2024 funds. You will open a purchase order and those funds will be encumbered. If the work's not completed prior to 6/30, that purchase order would roll into fiscal year 2025. When we do your budget amendment, we would increase your budget to reflect those encumbered funds, but they are funds from 24 that roll into 25, so it would not affect any of your 2025 operating. No problem. Okay. That brings us into your leases. Currently, you have a $1.5 million lease with the City of Cape Coral for the building lease, and that's all that we currently have. Which brings us into our conclusion. Basically, with the additional LCI funds combined with your existing PICO funds, the eligible capital equipment includes your purchase of your Shark van, the 2 additional buses that we are going to purchase and no longer lease, the Exagrid equipment and computer equipment. It has reduced your overall operating costs for the charter school, which resulted in an additional available funds of $906,500, and these funds have been placed into a reserve for future use and discussion. As well as with the additional 93 students at the high school, the revenues have increased for FEFP, resulting in $788,000, resulting in a reserve that has been placed for future use pending your student enrollment counts in the fall. Overall, this leaves us with $1,695,432 is unallocated for next year. I'll open it up for any questions or discussions.
Great, thank you for that. I do have a question about staffing changes. It looks like we are losing some staffing. How, I guess this is a question for Jackie really, is how is this going to affect us in the incoming year?
Some of those positions were ESSER funded positions, and the ESSER grant is going to expire. But the principals have been working on their staffing for the last couple of months, and they feel secure with the numbers that they have here. They can maintain the level of education that we've always done. Now, we're doing some jiggling, like for example, at the high school, we have a handful of classes that have 10 students, 5 students. Those classes will be full to 20, 25, and that's the kind of jiggling that we're doing.
So no fear that we would lose any of our traction that we gained?
Nope, not at all.
No. There's some more questions for Ms. Michaels?
So then with the addition of the 90 high school students, no additional staff is needed because of the...
We're doing, Principal Corey's doing a couple teaching through planning. So that means the teachers will get a stipend to teach an extra course. And 4 of those will offset a teacher. So we're saving teacher salaries in that respect, as well as uploading those classes to, capacity, so to speak. We are adding, there are a couple extra teachers that she had originally asked for that are in this count, but none in addition to that. Plus, we've done a little trade-off in teachers versus an athletic trainer that we originally had in here that we removed so we could add a teacher. So we've done some jiggling since the last time you've seen this change, staffing update.
I noticed that it looks like we've removed the speech pathologist. Was that also a position that was covered by the ESSER funds?
No, that's a good question. We originally were going to outsource for speech pathologists at all 4 schools because we couldn't find anyone that applied for the job. North has found somebody, which we hope will accept the position. So we're going to outsource for the rest of for the South Campus, and that's not included in staff. But it is included in the budget cost to outsource to a vendor that's local.
Okay, so the children that need that service is
They'll still get it. Yep.
Perfect. Thank you.
Do we have any other questions on the budget? Please, ma'am.
probably for Mr. Mason, but either one of you. Look, in looking back at the LCI analysis between the debt service being 1.5 and 3.2, why on the chart with the 1.5 are the LCI calculation, the very first column there, why is there nothing for 2025? Bottom chart, first column.
Good question. I think I missed it. It's a good question. It should be a number there.
So I'm assuming
Should
it
be the same number up there.
It should be 7.2.
Yes, it should be the 7.2 above.
Okay.
34 outside.
Yeah, because it's 41 versus 34. Okay, so then that, if that were in there, then ultimately the net available outlay wouldn't be a negative 2.3.
No, it would not. It would be the same number I provided you last time
Yeah.
with the previous information provided.
Okay. In fact, I'm doing very good math. It'd probably be a positive number. Let me see if I have it. I'll find it. My other question, I've got it right here. My other question is, so then in the top chart with the 3.2 debt service, the first 2 years, 25 and 26, we have negative in the capital outlay, the net. How will that be covered? Like by what mechanism will those negative numbers? Like you said something like the city would be
Yeah,
covering.
the same mechanism that we currently have in place. It's at the $1.5 million, we currently utilize the public service tax for the first 500 kilowatt hours. That was originally put in place in order to make up for this difference.
And that, those monies would still be
Mhm.
used for this purpose. Okay. Okay. Some questions?
Got it.
Mr. Pease?
So just to clarify and emphasize that point, I know I was at the city council meeting when this was discussed, and I think one of the council members thought that at the top right, the number there, 2.8 million, was a negative for the school, but it's actually, or for the OSIS school system, it's actually a negative for the city. Is that
Correct.
accurate?
Correct.
Okay. All right, so that, that clarifies. And also to bring everybody up to speed, if you weren't at that council the whole meeting or didn't have a chance to watch it back, there was conversation about a couple of options. I think there was 1 through 3. I know the board made a motion for me to go and speak on behalf of the board with the board's recommendation. Number one was to keep the lease status quo. Number 2 was to revert to the full debt service, and number 3 was some sort of hybrid. I don't remember how it was worded, but after board discussion, after the council discussed this, I think they landed on a general consensus that they would do some sort of combination of 1 and 3, if I remember correctly, which gets us to the point of, how do we transition the lease? I know that's not something we're going to settle today, but I think it's pretty obvious that with this capital influx of money that we're going to have a large amount of money. So the question really is, when will the lease transition? I know Mr. Mason has indicated that we could do it right away. And then there's some other things that are on the table today at the regular meeting at 5:30, which include a proposal to partner with Victory or with Blue Waters Development. And so I don't know if this is the time to start those, because they're all interrelated, right? Is if we want to have enough capital reserves to be able to do things like grow, and we think that that's to the benefit of the city, then it needs to be part of this conversation and how the lease is going to transition and how we're going to utilize those capital reserves. So I'll open that up to the floor here. I know that hasn't been officially discussed. It's on the agenda for the 5:30 meeting, but it is an important part of this conversation.
That's a great point, Member Pease. That is definitely something that we will speak about at our regular meeting. That's actually something that I have on my agenda item that we will open for discussion because there's a lot of logistics, of course, that we need to come to agreement on so that we can present to city council, right? And there's a lot of unanswered questions at the moment that we can't answer until we kind of come to some conclusions tonight, right? So,
Do you want
Jackie,
to discuss this, do you want to discuss the lease in our regular meeting? Is that what you said?
That's what I had
Prefer
planned on
doing
doing.
that?
If you prefer, that's fine. If you'd like to now.
I think it's probably up for discussion in our regular meeting. There are some things I want to bring to your attention about our lease in option 3.
Okay, we'll bring that up under Chairman's report, okay? Great. Mr. Manat?
And I think just going back to the lease, if it does move to the 3.2, and Councilman Long, one of the points that was made was that initially when we had the $3.2 million lease prior to going back, the charter school managed the finance, HR, maintenance, IT, facilities, and a requirement of us dropping down from 3.2 on a long-term lease that we all felt comfortable signing at the time was that the city would take over those functions. Because the city was going to be investing, right? So one of the questions is if we do go back to the $3.2 million lease, do we then begin assuming those departments back so we have more control, right? So that was one question that came up. And I think that's an open board question. Would we feel more comfortable if the city starts charging us 3.2, taking back those departments for our control, right? Because really, we're back to exactly where we started, and it was a difficult transition. The other point was that, and again, I think this is for the second meeting or maybe a future meeting, we were looking for, when we met with Councilman Hayden, his recommendation as we consider the Blue Waters proposal was to provide City Council a view of what would the revenues look like if we were able to grow, what would the financial implications look like so that we could have an informed decision on those additional revenues. Because potentially we could grow 1,000 to 1,500, maybe another 800 students, right? So potentially another 400 to 800 in middle school, and then potentially more in high school. So those additional revenues would be factored in to see how that offsets the financials, right? And if by chance our finance team isn't ready to provide that kind of support, how would the board begin to look into that so that we can have an analysis for City Council on that larger student population? Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah, I think maybe one more thing to add to that, maybe thinking of all the moving parts, is that if the city maintained those various departments and the lease went back to 3.2, would we be paying a different price for them?
Do you have any other questions? Mr. Peace?
So I think Karen just got at what my question was going to be, but that is, through the chair to Mr. Manaya, I guess, what would be the benefit other than control? And I'm a sitting principal, not with Oasis, but I loved having people who I can just talk to get things done at the school level. But at the end of the day, is there going to be a cost benefit to the Oasis system, or are those going to be additional operating costs that are just going to add to our need? So I'm just curious if there's a conversation, if people have thought through that, if anybody's looked at numbers, and that was a good question, is are we being charged, is Oasis being charged a premium, right, to have those services go through the city?
That's a great question. I believe I spoke to you a little while ago about maybe getting us the numbers between what we're paying for services now versus what we were paying. Is that something that we're going to have at the regular meeting, or is that something we can look forward to
Yeah,
possibly
we should have that for the next meeting.
for the next meeting? Oh, great.
I mean, just real quickly, the ordinance that provides for the services that the city provides to you, you pay us at cost. There's no premium. You don't pay cost plus or something like that, so it's right at cost. So if my staff works 100 hours, you get charged for 100 hours. You don't get charged for anything beyond that. So it's at cost.
So it goes per hours, there's not a set cost?
There's not a set cost, you're charged at cost. I don't charge you cost plus, so.
Out of curiosity, who determines the cost?
Our salary schedules, the pension contributions, everything else that's associated with the fringe benefits associated with an employee of the city. That's the cost associated with it.
So
So,
basically FTE
The,
divided
the
out
city,
per hour.
yeah, the city determines the cost of the employee.
Just out of curiosity, is there any other city departments that pay for the services? The same services that we?
Not in the same form that's being charged here. Now, in some cases, we do have some, as an example, in budget, I have an employee that's paid for by the utility system. And so they pay for the utility system. So the utility system pays for that employee.
Do we have any other questions on the budget workshop? Mr. Pease?
If I can interpret what you were saying there, Chris, I guess the question is, is Oasis Charter Schools a service to the community in the same way other departments are, or is it an ancillary service, right? And so I think we need to answer that fundamental question, because what it sounded like he was getting at was, are these other departments that provide services to the community paying the same rate? So that's an interesting conversation to have, and I'd love to hear people's opinion.
I've always said that I believe that the school system is not ancillary. I believe that we provide value to our community. We provide the workforce for our community. We provide community service to our community. We are the community. Our parents, our grandparents of the students are the community. So I don't ever think that we are ancillary. I don't think the founding fathers of the school thought that we were ancillary in any way as well. But that's my humble opinion. So.
Okay, one final question. If we were to move to the 3.2, and currently the negative balances, and it would for a couple of years come from the tax, after that, what would those tax funds be used for?
That'll be up to the city council.
So that would be something, the city council will determine, like the tax funds aren't going to go away until.
The city council make that final determination.
Right.
Yeah.
Thanks.
I think that city council did not have all the information at that time to determine how they could phase those out, if they could do them all at once, or what that looks like. So I don't think they necessarily know what that would look like. Do we have any other questions, comments? Ms. Rittler, thank you so much for your presentation and all your thoughts. We appreciate it.
Appreciate it, thank
Of
you.
course. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
All right, any other comments from the board or anybody else on the budget workshop? All right, we are going to go ahead and close this meeting, and we will reconvene at 5:30 for our regular schedule. Oh, yes, sir?
We need a motion to temporarily approve the budget.
Oh, we do, I apologize. All right, do we, please note that?
Which budget?
Okay, let's go ahead and let's get a motion and a second, let's discuss, and then we can decide on it about that. So, can I have a motion to temporarily approve our budget?
So moved.
Do we have a second? Okay, let's go ahead and open it up for discussion. Please, if you feel.
And the budget we are approving currently has the debt service at 1.5 still, because that has not changed yet.
Correct.
Thanks.
Okay, is there any other discussion on that? Since it may be changing, we are kind of approving a budget that's may not be the budget, right?
Right. So what would be the appropriate motion to approve the budget, given that it's in flux, right? Should we say based on what we've seen and what we know, it's conditional upon what the budget doesn't change, or?
This board is making a budget, temporary budget, that's gonna be finalized by the city council. So you're moving the budget as you, however you, whatever numbers you're agreeing upon tonight as a board. That's gonna be the temporary budget that's gonna be forwarded to the city council for final adoption.
Before you go with this, this is a workshop, so I'm not sure that we're going to approve something here. We actually bring back the budget for you at the next meeting.
For the-
For you
In
actually to adopt.
All right.
Set the template budget.
Yeah.
Okay?
Thank you,
wanted to make
Mark,
sure.
thank you for clarifying. And yes, we don't need a budget, we don't need a motion.
Need a budget. Need a budget, not a motion.
I just wanted to make the board aware of what I did ask the budget department, finance department. Can't remember, I said it last time. I did ask for 2 budget amendments, one at the October survey period and one in February. And I did that because right now we're basing our budget on a projection based on what we think enrollment might be, based on what we think the increase in FEFP will be. We won't know for sure until October. The October survey's over. So when we do a budget amendment in October, we will have a much better understanding of what kind of funds, what kind of revenues we have coming in. That will also help us decide how much we can hold over for teachers' salaries, because these numbers are not set in stone and they might not be as accurate as we'd like at this point. So just keep in mind that this is a projection. Within October, we'll have a much better understanding of what our funds look like to make those big decisions regarding teachers' salaries and such.
So, yes, that being said, this is a budget workshop, so what we're doing here is we are, as a collective body, kind of determining what we want presented to city council, not really what is given to us to present to city council, correct? So if there are things or changes or things we want in this budget or changed or added, that's what we are here to be doing as well, correct? So this isn't, you know, a set in stone thing. This is something where we could ask more things to be changed for the budget to be presented to us to then be passed to city council. Mr. Pease.
I can't find it, but there were 2 numbers that we had that were basically reserves right now, one for capital and one for operating. Does anybody look in the right direction on those 2 numbers?
On the conclusion page,
The numbers are right here. Your total reserves, 906,000.
There we go, at the bottom there in the middle.
Yep.
906, okay, so that 906 is capital reserves, right? That would have to go toward capital?
No, that's a result of you receiving the LCI funds. It's now covering previously covered capital or operating expenditures like your software. So it's freed up additional funds for future use.
Okay.
So it does not need to be utilized
So,
for capital.
so the combination there, the 1.694 million or whatever it is, that is freed up operating funds.
It is available for you to spend how you would like, whether it be personnel, operating. However, the 788 is the additional high school student reserve. We're gonna hold off
It's an
until the
assumption.
October.
Yeah.
It's an assumption at this
So,
point.
and then we have our other reserves, which I think I heard Mr. Mason say, and sorry, I'm new to this, you know, I've only been on this board for 6 months or so, but I think he mentioned there was a few million in reserves that we have available as well that have been utilized for like the bonuses and things like that.
Yes,
for
you're
teachers
unassigned.
to try to bring them up to the level of district teachers. But I guess my question to Ms. Collins is that 1 point, assuming that 788 holds up and our enrollment is good and FTE comes in, would the vast majority of that 1.7 million dollars be planned to try to increase salaries? Do you have thoughts on how you plan on utilizing those funds if that actually comes to fruition?
well, that's what I'd like to do. Remember, we are going to have a compensation study done so that we have an idea overall where we are in our every job description, where our salaries are comparative to our competition, and where we'd like to be. And that's an overall examination of every job description that we have. So that would be a board decision to figure out how much of that excess we want to allot to salaries, because, now remember, it compounds every year. It gets, those amounts get larger and larger. So yes, that would be where I'd like to have our focus, once that, the compensation study's done, on how we can utilize that excess, provided that we can keep enrollment steady. Because that enrollment has to happen in order to use anything over the 900,000.
And since you brought up the compensation study, I did have a question. With that, you mentioned that you're gonna have all the positions, would that also include your position? I may be jumping ahead, but I know that it looks like you had, fantastic reviews, and just so that we're aware of and keeping on, sort of on pace with how superintendents around our area in a similarly situated position are being compensated. I don't recall if we've seen those numbers before, but I was wondering, is that going to be part, or could that be part of this compensation study, just to make sure we're handling things correctly and we know what we're going to be looking at?
The problem with piggybacking on an existing contract is that the scope has to be identical. So we anticipated piggybacking on Leon County or Lee County. Neither one of those contracts includes the superintendent in their study. So I guess the question to us is, do we need to go out for an RFP on our own? Do we wait and see when those contracts will come in so we can piggyback without the superintendent on there? Or do we just take the study that Lee County's done, because they've expended the money, and do a comparison with the study already done and save the $50,000 to $90,000 that we have? That's gonna be a discussion for the board, but until we actually get physically the contract at hand, the Lee County contract, can't really explain any further. Leon County has not issued their contract as of yet. So we're looking at a very, unfortunately, a lengthy process for this, if we have to send out an RFP or we have to piggyback, unfortunately.
But the study that Lee County does would it normally include sort of the superintendent's compensation, or that's something
Don't
separate?
know. I don't think it does. I don't think it does. It
Okay.
does include administrators, but on what level? Are we talking at principals? Are we talking about, the superintendent's cabinet or directors? I just don't know. I don't know yet because I haven't seen it.
Okay.
So hopefully we'll get it within the course of a week and we can take a look at it and really analyze it. Is this what we want to copy?
Well, my hope is then if that's part of the information that we get, so that we're able to make accurate sort of understanding in that area. Thank you. Oh, sorry.
Just continuing the point that I was making earlier. So on the screen at the bottom there, those two numbers, that assumes a debt service of 1.55
Correct.
million. Obviously, the debt service becomes 3.2 million.
It would not change your numbers.
The number is, okay.
Correct. It
So
would-
that's important.
Yeah.
And then to go back to the compensation discussion, just for my edification, Ms. Collins, roughly how many employees do we have within the 4 schools? Ballpark?
About 250?
250, okay. And as you continue across there, the one thing that I think is very good, at the bottom of the screen, the projection for fiscal year 26, is that those reserves that we can use for operating,
Yes.
right, will continue to grow, and the FTE is going to continue to grow, assuming that those allocations grow. So from what I'm seeing on the screen, the projection is good long-term for how we could potentially utilize, if we have 1.6 million and then 2 million and then et cetera, for those costs that will compound, to use the term Ms. Collins was using there. But I think that's good news, and I would love to see some sort of analysis that with staff getting certain percentage raises like the school district did, that would show if they got that raise next year, here's what that would cost in terms of operating dollars, and then if continuing the following year with these projections, that's how much, you know, would we have the funds to be able to cover those types of raises? Because I know in the school district, you know, they had certain bands that they did. If you were in the district for 1 to 3 years, you got this percentage. If you were in the district more than 10 years, you got a certain percentage, all the way up to something like 10.5% or 11% or something like that. So, but to me, that's very good news at the bottom, and I'm glad to hear that that includes an assumption that eventually the lease would go back to the full 3.22 million. Again, the question is, when will that happen? I do think there needs to be some more discussion. I hope the city council will carefully consider everything when making that decision.
Do we have any more discussion? Anything more to add? Okay. That will convene our workshop meeting. We will adjourn and we will reconvene at 5:30 for our regularly scheduled meeting.